Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil, episode 118, The Power of Interactive Storytelling.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
And we are here with a very, very exciting episode.
Is that the word you're looking for?
That is the word I'm looking for, episode.
So you didn't sound super excited there.
It's
I'd be like, welcome back. We're so excited. This is a great episode.
That's because you were talking. I always lose a little bit of my excitement when you're talking.
Wow. You lose excitement when I'm talking. I'm hurt because I get so excited when you talk.
Well, that's because
Here's
you're human.
another boring history lesson about a documentary I watched when I was at home.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Interactive storytelling, which I was super excited to find out that today we were going to do this one, mostly because right up there, it's actually the second one, even though it's written as number one. I realize I see what you did there. That's clever. No, you guys can't see the board, but Jeff's got some clever stuff written up there. Do you want to talk about storytelling first? Because then I will
do that.
Springboard into number two, but you have written number one on the board.
You get confused so easily by
numbers.
The man's numbering system.
The man? Now you're the man?
No. That's my numbering system. The man's is slightly different.
I see.
He would start with the 1.
Well, it all starts with 1.
No, it starts with 0.
No, 0 is nothing. You can't do
Not in a numbering and counting system.
No, I read about this.
We're not going to go there. Yes, there go the unsubscribes.
Well, it's what is he talking about? Now, I do think that that's funny though. That 0 is actually 1. 0 is the starting point, but we always think of 1 as first.
Yeah, which is why a lot of people have trouble when they start to computer program because almost always 0 is the first position.
And 1 is usually 2.
Yeah. So number 18 is 19? Exactly.
Yeah.
First, before we go into what the elements are, let's talk about why interactive storytelling is an important thing for writers specifically to know about.
I'm going to say that that's almost redundant because writing is interactive storytelling.
It is, but it's when I'm talking about interactive storytelling, I'm putting emphasis on the interactive, where there's an active collaboration between individuals, the people who are consuming it and the people who are delivering it. And sometimes there's even some sharing of responsibilities.
For instance, when I play one of your games, I'm shouldered with usually most of the creation because you're
the plots,
terrible.
All of that stuff.
Yeah, everything. That's all on me.
So the reason it's important is one of the toughest things I've noticed from writers is they get stuck. Characters will trick them. And this is a very, very common thing. If you're writing a good story.
How do you mean characters will trick them? Give me an example.
So, okay. I've been building up this whole book to get around to page 47 where this guy's going to kill the villain.
Okay.
And then I realize
because he's not able to or the story forbids it?
The character themselves, it would no longer make sense for them to do.
It would know. The character development has
rendered to that point mute, at least on that page.
Mute? Do you mean moot?
Moot. And mute.
And mute. He's been quiet the whole time.
Because he can no longer speak, and people who don't speak can't kill unless they have a weapon.
That's an interesting train of logic you've got going on there. Yeah, we've talked about this before. This is one of the things that I have mentioned, and it's something that I really like it, I guess I'm going to say, because I do, because I think I focus on it, where you start a story, or like usually when we start a story, at least for me, it's a small idea. Like you'll start off like, oh, wouldn't it be a cool revenge plot if X happened?
Yeah.
So that X happening becomes how you build everything around it. So you start building characters and backstories, and then you start leading up to X. But everything you've established, which is good, and you don't want to scrap that, starts leading away from X, and you can't get to X.
Either the character wouldn't
do it,
be in the position, or wouldn't do it.
I got this great idea for a scene where the hero just stabs the villain right in the back, but he's too honorable to do that, so you can't.
Yeah. Or he would refuse to go to the warehouse in the first place because it's after 9 o'clock and he's not allowed out after dark.
Right. He sees lawful good, so can't do it. So, yeah, I mean, it's great. You and I are completely familiar with this, and I certainly hope the reader has either caught this in a book or in a movie. Like, how many times have you been watching a movie and you see a character do something and you're like, this character is too experienced or too smart to do something
make that
dumb.
Stupid move.
Exactly. Yeah. So, like, why did that?
Especially that one.
And it ends up, usually when I see that, it ends up being at a pivotal point in the movie.
And this is one of those tough things for me as a soldier sometimes. And I've grown a very large ability to
the suspension of disbelief.
The suspension of disbelief in me is strong.
You know what I'm immediately reminded of? I'm sure you've seen the movie Tears of the Sun.
Maybe.
Oh, you should watch it. It's so good. You've got a group of Navy SEALs dropped in an African country trying to rescue some, Americans in X place, and they end up having to not only help these, like they went there just to save a couple of, actually they weren't Americans, some doctor. They went there to save like one or two people, and the person refuses to leave unless they try to help this entire village.
Yeah.
Gets to a point in the movie where, and these are Navy SEALs. Mm-hmm. These guys are super well trained.
Yes.
Amongst
the best warriors in the world.
Right. Yeah. Especially in the type of environment they're in. They're doing jungle warfare. And throughout the movie, they're doing totally elite moves. They're doing slick stuff, and they're tricking the enemy, and they're grossly outnumbered, but they're doing well.
Yeah.
And then towards the end of the movie, a guy does something so blatantly like novice rookie move. Like, as he's doing it, I'm like, this guy is way too elite of a soldier to make such a tactically stupid move. And that triggers like this big gunfight. And I'm like, there's no way. There is just no way he would do that.
Well, there's funny things that might sometimes appear to be novice that are not. They might appear novice to someone who sort of knows what they're talking about, but not novice to someone who knows what they're talking about.
Well, let me ask you this, because
I'll give you a good example.
Because I don't know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to stuff. I'm not a soldier. I'm not a Navy SEAL.
You have an idea from your interactions and interests.
Right. Okay. So if you're being hunted by literally a small army and you're out in a jungle environment, and you're, maintaining cover, and you've been hiding the whole time, and they're hot on your heels, like they're in your neighborhood.
Okay.
Would you stand up in an open field
and shoot?
No, just stand up.
No, what I would do is I would try to get behind them and start hunting them, because that's the last place that they'll look.
I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about the fact that in an open area, in a completely open area, and he's got tall grass.
He stands up and gets shot.
He stands up and gets shot.
Yeah, no, that probably would not happen.
And I'm like, that's like even super basic soldier stuff. That's not like elite soldier stuff. That's like basic stuff. Remain in cover.
Yes, I was a basic soldier, and I would have a much better plan to deal with that than standing up.
Yeah.
Now, here's a quick one to you that I always think of when people don't think it's believable. I think it was the beginning of Lone Survivor, which is a book, and I believe they made it into a movie.
They did. Very good movie.
And I think this is the right one, so correct me if this is not the beginning story, but essentially, I believe this is a group of SEALs, once again, in Afghanistan, just doing an observation on a Taliban position. And
I want to say, we'll keep going.
And a young child shepherd walks up.
And sees them.
And they pull a gun out, and it's the struggle of, do I shoot him or not? And they opt not to shoot the kid, who then alerts the bad guys and starts the whole events of the story.
Right. Okay. So what's your problem with it?
I have none, but a lot of people I talk to are like, oh, you just shoot him.
People who are not soldiers?
Yes.
Well, of course. So soldiers have to make very difficult decisions very quickly.
Yes.
But they're not, they have hearts.
So this kid, he probably had his own children at home.
Right.
Or he knew kids, definitely. I mean, a lot of times people will confuse hesitation in a soldier as something, especially like for elite soldiers, as inaccurate. I forgot who said this. I think it might have actually been from Burn Notice, where it was he made the statement.
I gotta watch that show.
You gotta watch that show.
I know. It's on my list.
And he made the statement that they're not that commando units and spies are not Rambo, but as long as they can stay in control of the circumstance, they just appear that way.
Did you see, what was it, American Sniper? The one with Bradley Cooper? Is that the name of it? The one
No,
Clint Eastwood?
I did not see that one.
Is that the right title? Am I thinking of the right title?
I believe there is a movie called American Sniper.
I know there is. I just can't remember if that's the one I'm thinking of.
That's off of the guy from Iraq who was shot, I think, when he got home.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, that starts with him having to choose to shoot a child or not.
Yeah.
Like that's like the big thing. And he struggles with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole thing. It's not like, oh, I'm a soldier, so killing a child is easy for me. Like, that's ridiculous.
This is the shot. You take the shot.
Yeah, right.
And one of the beautiful things with American troops that most people don't know is that American troops are the one set of troops that have a history of being disobedient when given orders that they don't like. Now, they'll still try and achieve the mission because achieving the mission is always important, but they will actually do things that were outside of the scope of their orders and all sorts of things along those paths to get the job done in the way that makes the most sense at the time. And that's not just not killing civilians. I mean, civilians might die anyway. That once again, that's something that the soldier would struggle with. But if they see a better opportunity that they didn't recognize before, they'll go for it.
Yeah.
But this is all way off the top.
Yeah, we've got way off subject. So getting
let's get back. But what we're doing right now is actually the first one. And just to recap quickly, the reason this is important for writers are the best way to tell your story is in the presence of people who are at least vaguely interested in what you're doing, who can respond to you as they're doing it. And that's what I mean when I talk about interactive storytelling. And
well, now I'm hurt because you haven't asked me how to write your book.
No, but the thing is, a lot of the methodologies, the way the world was built, you tested a lot of that, and
that's
you
true.
and many other people.
That's true.
So the thing is, you're not testing out necessarily the story. So what you're saying is,
I wrote your book.
No,
that's what you're saying.
No, because you're too lazy.
That's what I hear you saying.
My book should have been done years ago if you'd written it.
Oh, if I had done it, it would have been done years ago.
Yes, if you'd written my book, it would have been done years ago.
So look for The Steward's Son by Michael Miller.
But no, I mean, a lot of people have been in my world, and I learned good and bad things about my world from doing that. I learned good and bad techniques of storytelling.
Mm-hmm. So all the good you got from me.
And all the good I got from you. And the most important thing I learned was how to deal with characters who boggle your mind. Because there's one thing, especially when we get into some of the later ones, when we get to tabletop.
Tabletop players are unpredictable.
Tabletop players are really unpredictable. And when they come up with it, you might even think that it's not right for their character, but you think about it for a second and it is. You just didn't
see it that way. Yeah.
And so a lot of times when you're storytelling, that you'll do that to yourself because over the progression, the character is building up in your mind. And so when you get to that pivotal scene, your character won't be there, or he won't want to do it in the way you wanted him to do it, with the cool leaping off the building and plunging his sword through the guy's nostril, which would be.
He's got really good aim.
And physics is kind of tough on that because he had to kind of swing up.
Yeah, an upward swing after coming down off the top of the building. Yeah.
Which is
he's a
why
great swordsman. Yeah. He's a rapier,
yeah.
To get right in the nostril.
Yeah. And that's one the biggest reason I love interactive storytelling. Let's get into the first one, which is actually just oral storytelling, which is obviously the traditional way humans have told stories. If you're ever trying to teach people something, do it in a story. Never do it the way I do it, which is present it as information, which is important too. But stories to top off a point usually drive the point home deeper. That's the reason why you look at myths. They're all stories. And people remember them because they're stories. And human minds are very good at holding on to maybe not the exact words, but holding on to the idea of stories that they've seen or listened to in the past.
That's a good point. I just did my OSHA training this past week, and
you remember none of it.
Well, no, but there's tons throughout the entirety of it is case study after case study. So they'll be like, here's why you don't do a given thing.
And here's where Johnny blew up.
Exactly. And here's and there's so many sad stories where guys neglected a simple safety regulation, something very basic, something that, we would do all the time, and it killed him, or it killed his coworker. Worse. There were cases of that where a fitting. Here's a great one. There's a great one. It's a good example, but bad story. Two guys on a scaffolding, and a simple fall protection. Like if you're on a scaffolding, you have to have a harness. If you're over 6 feet, you have to have a harness on, anchored. Now that's really inconvenient to work with, and that's fine if you're working on a painting scaffold. Okay. These guys were on a window washer scaffold, so they are like 11 stories up. Yeah. So of course you're going to wear a harness, and this is the
no-brainer territory.
This is the absolute no-brainer territory. So they're both wearing them. One guy was anchored to the scaffold, the other was not. Does you no good to wear them?
Oh, he didn't actually just didn't attach it.
Yeah, like it's very I've seen guys do this where they have the harness on and they clip the lanyard to themselves.
So they don't get yelled at. Someone doesn't see that harness.
Exactly. So, but they're free to move about because it's a pain to work with a harness. When you're hooked up, sometimes you can't reach material or you can't reach a thing. So he wasn't anchored off to the scaffold. Well, the scaffold was attached at 2 points on the right and the left. The left gave way and it swung down, so it was only hanging from the right hand side. The kind of thing you'd see in like a Superman movie from the early 80s. And one guy was dangled by his lanyard, and the other guy plummeted 11 stories to his death. So that story sticks with me.
Yeah.
And that more so than the regulation.
And this is the thing too, especially when you get into nonfiction, the stories don't have to be made up.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about fiction, a lot of times you're pulling like parts of conversations you've actually interacted in that are memorable to you, and you're recreating them with different details in a context. And so the thing to remember is stories are the things that people remember about a discussion the most. It's the best way to learn outside of teaching, which is the best way to learn is to just tell people, go out and actually start teaching people how to do it. That's why they'll tell you, like, if you take a big test and you suck at algebra, well, guess what you do? You teach it to your teddy bear because no one else will want to hear you. But the teddy bear, but it will help you to go through the process of explaining how it works to something else, even if it's not real.
So what you're trying to say is that you should have your teddy bear take your algebra test.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
That is. I can't believe anything about that when I was in school. That would have saved a lot of class time.
Yeah, really. So stories.
Yep. So
stories.
The great thing with storytelling, when you do it to a crowd, you get reactions. And the advanced version of this is stage theater, which I have more of a background with stage theater than oral storytelling.
I always have to remind myself of that you are an accomplished actor.
Well, the thing was, Jim and I were planning to go to school together, Mr. Six and I wussed out and I went to computer school instead. So. And
he ended up in computers anyway, so all's well that ends well.
But the funny thing is, it's like, first there's an exhilaration to it that some people, like I get, which is the reason why I'm drawn to that kind of activity. Other people are horrified of it. If you're horrified of it, do it, with your kids at night. Do it in small groups. And if you're really afraid of it, but you really want to go and start doing this, go to like a Toastmasters or something like that. They'll give you all of the basics for how to speak in public and how to overcome that. And it's usually preparation will help people overcome those fears, unless it's too extreme where you would need help. But we're not talking about that today. So, are
we ready to go to number one or number two?
I'm holding off on you here.
Okay. I know you're like teasing me. You're like you're running around like extending it longer.
Yeah. So the thing to remember with storytelling is it's the reactions. That's the interaction level. So it's like if you see 90% of the audience asleep with your story. And this is the tricky part. It could be the performance side or the content. And you have to be able to determine later on what it is. And you can do that by improving the way you deliver, which will show that, whenever you talk about that elf Maraphanes, and people just go Maraphanes and you start explaining how he looks and they're all like falling asleep afterwards. then you know that maybe the character or the scene doesn't work.
See, the one thing that this makes me think of is...
and yes, I just made that name up.
No, I know you did, which is why I was about to give you props for good pull, good referees. I want to make Raffinese now. We should write the name down, and you know what? Let's use that in the project we got coming out, Raffinese. Anyway, the thing about oral storytelling is that if you know how to tell a story, it doesn't have to be interesting. Yes. So there's two very distinct skills here going on. One is the ability to tell a good story, and the other is to have a good story to tell. Creating a good story to tell is one thing. Telling it is another. I know people who have, I know the story and I've heard other people tell it and I'm bored. And I'm this is not, this is an exciting story and you are telling it terribly and no one's interested.
And you get that old man who's been sitting on his porch for 900 years and he can tell you about how this newspaper was delivered that day and you're riveted. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So
let's go on to number 2, which is games.
That's not number 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's number 2, but it's not number...
Whose stupid numbering system is that?
3. That's actually number 3, but it's number 2. So, number 1 is video games.
Okay.
Which is number 2. And actually, as much as I love them, I don't think we need to spend much time on them. No. If you're breathing and listening to this podcast, you know what a video game is. I'm not going to get into the explanation of it. But the thing that is... there's so many great things about video games in my book, but as far as we're concerned with world building
and the interactive storytelling. I'm going to go to Fable. I'm going to go to I'm trying to think of another BioWare game or another game where you actually have agency over the story. Because most video games, if you go back to the original storytelling video games, I immediately think of Zork. Zork was a text-based computer game where literally there was no graphics to look at whatsoever. It's just text. You played it on your abacus. Yeah.
Right. It wasn't on the abacus, but may as well have been. And you would type I turn west, I walk west, I pick up sword, and stuff like that. So everything that was occurring within this fantasy universe was all occurring in your mind's eye because you were just reading words. But you still were only limited to what the game would allow you to do. And video games very much still have that limitation, but you have the illusion of agency based on what you expose yourself to within the game. Skyrim. Skyrim is a great example.
Illusion of agency,
because...
And in a way, you have semi-agency because you can determine to completely ignore stuff.
Well, that's what I was going to say. And that's why I want to use the term illusion of agency, because if it was complete agency, you would be creating it. But for the simple fact that you're playing a game, someone else had to create all the possibilities and eventualities that you're going to go through. The thing about Skyrim is that you can play 5 runs of Skyrim. I could play 5 full runs of Skyrim, and we would never have the same experience, not any of them, because there are so many variables and so many different ways to play that game that it's really not the same game.
Now, you would say that, and that's probably true for you, and that's true for anyone else, but undoubtedly within the first dungeon, I drop back to stealth killing everyone because that's how
you like to play.
I love to play that way.
But
I play 2 ways, one with a bow, one with dagger.
Well, let me ask you this though. If you played it once, have you played it more than once? You've been through the whole game more than once?
I don't know if I finished the main story more than once, but I've had several different characters that I played more than 2 hours.
Once you went to the second character, did you make different choices?
Yes, and then I usually regret them. I should have done this first. I should have done that first.
But you still made different choices.
Yes.
But that's my point. You ended up with a different experience because you made different choices.
And I did replay. It's because I wanted to see some of the other places you can tree off in the game.
I just thought of another great example.
So the faction fighting in the game. So I played where one game I finished it one way, the other game I finished the other way. And then I played a third game because I got really annoyed with the second way. I felt I didn't like it, so I had to redo it.
Here's a really great example of agency. It's agency in a different way, though, because it's kind of random. There's a game called The Shadows of Mordor, and within that game, they have a nemesis system. So as you meet enemies in the game, they are randomly I believe the names are randomly generated. I'm not sure about that. They may have already created all the names, but who you run into and who you end up killing, it's not like, oh, I've run into, there are bosses. So there are specific bosses that you will run into the game. So specific fights that you have to do. As you run into enemies in the game, they have specific, like all the captains have specific names. Yeah. And if they kill you, you start to develop a nemesis with them. They remember you. They start recognizing you and saying things to you. They climb in rank and become more powerful. As they kill you, just the way you would gain more power after killing other enemies in a video game. It's like they are full-fledged characters too.
That was a neat part of that game.
It was a very neat part.
I never really enjoyed it.
But I know you weren't a big fan of that game, but my point for mentioning it is that creates a story. Like you end up developing a story on your own while playing
in a much different way in that game. Yeah.
Playing in the game, like, so you have like, you know, Gork the orc, and he kills you a couple of times, and he starts developing a rivalry with you within the game. So you start hating him because he's killed you a couple of times and he taunts you every time you see him. And there's no story with him. Like the game hasn't created a plot line or plot device for this character other than he bothers you.
Of course.
And you start creating this interactive story for yourself to make it more interesting. And that, I think, is a great example of how video games create that feeling of interactive storytelling.
And the big thing I wanted to really cover with video games is this notion that the feedback portion is the tougher thing. And this isn't a great way to...
Yeah, video gamers don't like giving feedback.
As a storyteller, no, but I'm saying as a storyteller, there's a lot of production cost. It's like writing a book, but expensive. And to get the feedback, you can actually have mechanisms in a video game that will actually give you real time or asynchronous feedback that will tell you, hey, everyone seems to choose this path at this point, which I would be evil if I ever ran like an MMO, because if there became a really beloved NPC, he would die.
Yeah.
And I would like, okay, I need a great death scene for this guy now.
Well, of course. But see, people get hooked on. That's good storytelling. Look at Game of Thrones. They kill everybody in Game of Thrones. If you love the character, chances are they're going to die.
Oh, he's a horrible storyteller, though, because he's killed the characters I like.
Wait a minute.
What was I just saying?
Yeah, exactly. Wait a minute. Okay, that's what I want to do.
But, I mean, it's the feedback portion, obviously, online you can get from movies or books or any kind of entertainment people enjoy. There's a different level you can pull back in. And there are actually some kinds of video games to where there is also, I don't know if they make games like this anymore. And it makes me kind of sad because I don't think they do, where you can have like stories created by players. I guess in a way you could create like your own plugins for like Skyrim and stuff like that if you wanted to go that route, like, make your world in Skyrim.
Well, certainly.
But I was thinking more like in some of the old like Neverwinter Nights, you could actually create dungeons and stuff.
There's still a lot of that. There's still a lot of that. I mean, we don't have to get it. I could go on and on. Yeah. So that still exists. I'll just say that.
So we'll now pull in the next kind of interactive storytelling, which are board games and card games. And these kind of have the same limitation of video games where there's a high production cost. And unless you're playing the game with someone, like if you make it at home on your own and use that to tell a story to people, now, stories can be interesting. Like Settlers of Catan is really a story-based game.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, give me an example of what board games or card games you would say you would consider like this.
Anything like those cooperative, either zombie or haunted house kind of games, where those are a little bit better.
like a
House on the Haunted Hill,
a House on the Haunted Hill, Zombicide, anything
which
like
was a fun one. Yeah,
I love Zombicide, big fan.
Yes.
House on Haunted Hill is actually a really well designed game.
And you
have to have like 4 people to play it, unfortunately,
and you want for good people. I mean, the better, more devious they are, the better the game becomes. Because that one's interesting because it's cooperative until a point, in which case one person becomes the bad guy and everyone else is the good guy.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with the game, the basic gist is 4 people go into a haunted house
because they're stupid.
And if you're not familiar with how board games have evolved, like when you say board game in America, the average person just thinks of a set board. But
Monopoly.
Sorry. What am I, Canadian? Sorry. Monopoly.
You hoser.
Anyway, so set boards, but there's tons of more modern board games where there is no board per se, but the board is created by using tiles. Thus, it's modular, and thus each game can be different. So it's not like a game of Monopoly is predictable because the board doesn't change. Well, a game of House on the Haunted Hill or Zombicide, it's not as predictable because the board changes every time you play. With House on Haunted Hill, you go in with 4 friends. Everybody's on the same team, but at a certain point in the game, something occurs and one of the players becomes the villain of the game, and then the other 3 have to fight and kill that person, or that person kills the other player. And that person gets more powerful than the other 3 together. So you have to work cooperatively, but it's really neat because you never know who's going to become the bad guy. So everyone's collecting equipment and prepping for the inevitable catastrophe that's going to occur. And then it's like, okay, well, who's going to be
And if you help out someone early on, you might lose an important piece of equipment you need later.
Right. Or you might give it to someone who becomes the villain.
That's my point. Yeah. Yeah.
So great game.
Yeah. Great game. So card games, I can't think of too many that are really story-based in what I'm saying.
I was going to say, like, Magic comes to mind, but Magic has tons of novels. Plays it
story, but they don't, when you play it, it's not
a story when you play it. It's a strategy game.
Munchkin and stuff like that. So there's a lot of strategy games, and in a way, strategy games are stories.
Yeah.
But they're not really the kind we're talking about. But I'm assuming there are, because there are so many different kinds of games out there now.
Yeah.
So
there are.
Let me know if you know of any card games that. But the thing is, I mainly talk about develop your own, take your own board games and use it to tell a story.
Well, that's what I do with Zombicide. Like, Zombicide can be played just as the rules lay it out, and you can just play it out and have it be like a regular board game. I write a story and, a scenario for every time. Like, I have people come over to play. Like, I actually have to do a lot of prep to play this board game because I create a whole board. I create a scenario. I create events that occur within the game. I actually make it a little more complicated than the game. Not that it wasn't intended to be played that way. I just take it a level deeper. Like, when you take a character, I want you to play either as that character or create a little backstory for that character and play it that way.
Yeah.
So, like, one of my friends, he came across a baby. Like, that was an event. He found a baby, and I was like, all right, well, what do you do? Like, if he took the baby, he was going to get more powerful and find a weapon. But if he didn't take the baby, then zombies were the advantage to having the baby was more weapons. The disadvantage to having the baby was the baby's going to cry and thus draw more zombies to him. But if he didn't take the baby, a whole bunch of zombies were going to immediately attack him. He says, all right, well, I killed the baby.
Yeah.
I'm like, he was like a late 20s woman. I was like, why would this woman kill a baby? And he's like, Carol did it in Walking Dead. And I'm like, so I couldn't argue his logic because he had precedence, but I didn't think his character would do it.
Well, and here's my one warning to you is when you put emotionally charged circumstances in front of other people to make those decisions, sometimes they will not react the way you want them to because they will see it as a step in the way of their game.
And that's how I saw him do it. Like, I wanted him to play it a little deeper, and I think he just saw it as a logical decision. Like, if I pick up this baby, it's going to hinder my progress.
Yes. But in a zombie apocalypse, that's maybe a fair decision anyway.
Yeah. Oh, he justified it with logic, so I was like, all right, fine.
But could you at least give me some emotional strain before you pop the baby?
Right. He's just like, I killed a baby. I'm like, what? I'm like, it's a baby. What did the baby do? And he's like, the baby's crying. Yeah. Boom. Look at the flowers. Look at the flowers.
Okay. And so now we're going to get to what I've been
building towards,
and which is my favorite one. And if you listen to the show that I'm a tabletop gamer.
Yeah, I mean it's mine too. Like,
more of a game master.
Yeah,
but tabletop games, and when I say tabletop games, where I'm separating that from board games these are games that they're designed for you to role play characters in. So people would typically call them role playing games. They've become known as tabletop games because you play them typically or traditionally on a table with dice.
See, I say the full on. I say tabletop role playing games.
Yes, because you're not as lazy as me. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Is like it's more thorough.
Yeah.
Because if you say tabletop, people think, oh, well, do you mean like Will Wheaton's tabletop where they play tons of board games? Like, no, I mean like GURPS and Shadowrun and.
saying role playing afterwards.
But then if you say just role playing games, people think, oh, you mean like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy? No. I mean,
no, because we're talking about tabletop games. In that role playing games,
Yeah.
because there's lots of games on tables. There's lots of video games, but not all of them are role playing.
You can play video games on tables.
Okay, there are 3 specific ones that have to be brought up here.
Have to be brought up.
Well, really, only one of them has to be brought up here.
Well, really, only 2 of those are games, right?
No, 3 of them are.
No. Number 2, that second one you have there is not a game.
Okay. Well,
Admit you're wrong.
it is a game.
It's not a game. It's a system.
For playing games in.
It's not a game.
Yes, it is.
Say it, Jeff.
It's a game.
It's not a game.
You don't need to buy anything but the basic book and you can play it.
It's not a game. It's a system. You create the game.
Yeah, but the same thing is true with all of those.
No.
Why don't we talk about them?
No. All right, what's the first one?
The first one and the most important one to know, because this is the easiest one to find people to interact with you in, is Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons, a grandfather of all.
It is to role-playing games that Middle Earth is to fantasy novels.
Mm-hmm.
And it still is by far probably the biggest one, even though there's a lot more competition out there now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And it's sort of Tolkien-esque fantasy. And it's their settings, which is one of my problems with it, was traditionally you worked out, and some of their early settings their settings are terrific, but they weren't mine.
They weren't yours.
And there are things I actually learned from playing. There are things I didn't like about their settings, which actually helped formulate a lot of my world building ideas that were like, some parts just didn't feel natural. They didn't feel like they fit in like the way they should. There's no logical reason that in the middle of this, group of European style civilizations, there's this African tribal, culture. And you could maybe even come up with reasons why it could happen, but there were just, they wanted that culture there.
Geographically, this shouldn't be this way. Yeah.
Yeah. And just the interaction with the other cultures right around them, all of the cultures would sort of meld closer to each other over time. That's a natural thing of people being able to communicate with each other. And so, and me being this really weird geek who overthinks this kind of stuff.
Come on.
How many? You'd be shocked to learn.
Yeah. So if you weren't paying attention, this is episode 118 of the World Builders Anvil.
And we have a whole bunch more written down.
Yeah, there's a lot more coming. So Jeff does think about this a lot.
Yes, because I watch all those boring
Oh, yeah. You like that. You like it. It's kind of a low blow, I know.
I've been actually watching one on evolution recently, talking about like how ants and plants have become symbiotic with each other. But we'll say that I'll do a whole episode on that for you.
Okay. You gonna duct tape me down for that?
Okay.
You see, I know I make those jokes, but I like watching that stuff too.
Yeah, I know. Oh yeah, we're very similar in geeks, even though we bust each other for these are things that we both like.
Jeff's a big nerd.
Then actually, my first world building started actually filling in holes on maps in D&D settings. The first city, the first knightly orders were all in Dragonlance.
Oh, like there you found a gap in something,
and I wanted to tell a story somewhere, and there was nothing on the map, so I'd start making my own stuff because I wanted to tell a story there, and there was nothing there, and that's why I picked there.
Because no one has anything there, so I do. Oh, you don't know what's there? I do.
They're up to 5th edition. The rules have changed a lot over time. If you want to go the D&D route, it's very good. Realize each edition, especially between like 1st edition and 5th edition, are really very different games.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of D&D's system. I always found it a little cumbersome.
The system is a lot different in 5th edition.
Yeah.
It's more like a light version. I don't want to say this because
like a diet,
bigger, but
like diet GURPS.
It's the diet GURPS now, where you kind of purchase things. You're more building characters now. It makes it a little bit easier if you want to get your own stuff into the world. And maybe a lot easier if I spent time going over it. But since
and to be fair, like, do you mind if I transition into number 2? So the first one up there is D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. The second one up there is GURPS. If you're not familiar, GURPS, GURPS, stands for Generic Universal Role Playing System. I'm going to argue with Jeff. I'm not going to continue to argue. I'm not going to eat up a lot of time. I stand by that GURPS is not a game. It is a system for playing any game you want.
Yeah.
Jeff's going to say it's a game, and he's wrong. So the thing about GURPS is it's just as the name implies, it's a universal way to make a tabletop role playing game out of any setting you want. There are book modules for everything. I mean, you want to do a space adventure, you want to do a Dungeons and Dragons type adventure, you want to do samurais or brain farting on the what's the steampunk. If you want to do steampunk, you want to do cyberpunk, like anything.
You can either develop your own stuff off of the basics, or you can go by. They have extended source books to help give you like this is what stuff in the space age would look like. And
the other cool thing about it is GURPS lends itself, like if you want to play a different game. Like with me, I was developing a Shadowrun game, so I went out and bought a bunch of Shadowrun books. So we're talking a different game, a different company,
a different system,
completely different system. But I bought all those books. I learned that stuff. And then I used the GURPS system books to run the game. So I used the GURPS system, but off of a Shadowrun world. So I used their source books for all of the creative material, but for all the mechanical material, I used the GURPS books.
And there are actually a lot of campaign idea books as well too. You can get, if you want to do historical fiction, or you want to do, weird fantasy, or anything you want. They have all kinds of different source books that aren't game mechanics. There will be some in there, but it's more about the setting than about the game. I have a lot of both because I like looking at settings and stuff like that. But for me, really the essential books are really the books to play the game, which there are 2 basic books now because it's a pretty big game. One for players, one for campaign development.
I will argue they're in 4th edition, or have they gotten to 5th yet?
It's in 4th.
It's in 4th. I did not like the 4th edition changes. I prefer 3rd edition. So for me,
I like them, and here's why.
Okay.
It streamlines it in a way. It's trying to make it more accessible to a larger audience, and a little bit more visually based. The books are. The system is more streamlined.
I liked the presentation, but I found when I got into the mechanics, I preferred and maybe it's just because like I cut my teeth on 3rd edition. Like the vast majority of my tabletop experience was with GURPS. I mean, I played a lot of White Wolf too. I definitely played some D&D, but after we played D&D a little bit, my buddy, who we also played Cyberpunk with another friend, he decided that GURPS was better because our friend running Cyberpunk used GURPS. So he changed all of his D&D stuff to GURPS.
And of course, I use GURPS.
And then you used GURPS. And how did you discover GURPS? Was it the chicken or the egg? Like, did you get it through me, or did you discover it on your own and we happened to be in the same groups?
We happened to be in the same groups because I started using it when I was in the service.
Oh, yeah.
Because I just got so frustrated with players who knew everything about the worlds that I was running stuff in.
Okay.
And it drove me crazy because I don't want those things to be like this. And
do you mean like you're playing D&D and they know the D&D world?
Yes, and you're not doing goblins right, my goblins are not like D&D goblins.
I love your goblins,
and
I love your goblins.
And so it frustrated me, so I stopped using D&D because of players' prejudices towards the way things are in the rule books.
The way things ought to be,
yes,
according to D&D. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's a fun system. But for a world builder, I think GURPS, it lends more to a world builder because if you just use the system rules, it does not place limits on your world.
Or your story.
There aren't like giant monster manuals. So you have to think up monsters if you want them.
Well, or you can just buy the source books for other stuff and use them as you see fit. Which all the guys that I knew, they did that. They almost all of them had a D&D monster manual. And they would pull straight out of that, but make a GURPS equivalent.
Most definitely.
We spend a lot of time on this show talking to novelists. I feel like most of our avatar talk is towards writers, but I really hope there's game builders and game masters listening to this episode in particular, and that I can say to you guys, like, GURPS is such a great tool, and like that world build. I love that world building. I love. Like that's what got me into world building, really.
Yeah.
Was GURPS and Shadowrun. And
the neat thing with GURPS is their system is so complete, but it's not, once you know how to make characters, it's not very complicated to do. but because of the way it spans over times, it can inspire you back.
Yeah.
I mean, I never thought about getting, applying, or even covering this part of my world, but, there's a whole skill section for that. So maybe I can flesh out my governments to cover the thief spy aspect of a government.
And I want to really stress something about guidebooks for role-playing games. Really get that it's a guidebook. It's a guide. So like anything that's in any one of these books, if you don't like it, it's your world. You're creating the world and the game. Change it. Like, I can't tell you, we had house rules for like everything that we did. Like, we'd be playing at someone's house and be like, okay, I know that you guys know the system. So understand that this thing doesn't work this way. And that's about the only big change we do or whatever. And also the system, depending on how you play, some people want to play a mechanic heavy game and it's all about a game. I like to play a story and it's all about the story. So the mechanics should serve the story. And the thing that's great about GURPS, you can pare it down and simplify it so that you're really having a great interactive story. And that's like what Jim and I did in New York. That's what it was. Granted, we were using White Wolf at that point. We weren't using GURPS. And that's what I think you and I are going to be doing. We're going to pare it down so that it's much more story heavy than mechanic heavy, right? Because that's
which is actually going to lead us right into our third thing on the list there.
What? I can't even read that.
Descriptors.
Okay, I can read that.
And there's an indie game developer called Matthew Bannock. I don't know if you've heard of him or not.
I have, yeah.
Who developed a dice list system.
Really?
Which will be very good for a podcast because the dice is rolling in the background. And I understand correctly. It's an adjective driven thing where you can be awarded adjectives and then you spend adjectives to do things.
Okay, so I was going to say, how does it?
And I might be confusing it because he's actually developed a lot of little neat games like this, but he did it for a game convention somewhere. But I think we're going to be using that system when we move forward in what we're doing. I'll send you the link. And it'll actually be in the show notes for this.
Yeah, and guys, check out Matthew Bannock. Awesome, good, big friend of the show.
One of the things I want to say here is there's so many different types. Like, if you don't want a system-heavy game, you don't need them. There are so many different indie games out there now. We could spend a whole episode just reading a list.
Oh, yeah. There's
and
so many.
Right now, just talking about it, and actually looking at the time now, I realize that Mike has told so many worthless stories here that we're going to probably cut it off here after we talk about the types of tabletop games. But what we'll do, just to go over there quickly, what we actually did cover, though, is we talked about types of interactive storytelling that you can do through actual storytelling, video games, using board games or tabletop games. And then we talked about a couple different types. My call to action to you is find some people who you enjoy spending time with, who you think would enjoy your world. If you come with an idea for a system of magic, find one of these things to allow you to test out to see, one, do you get the classic geek response? That's not realistic. Because that will exist, and it'll always exist to some level, no matter how you did it, or, that's just like someone else's system, or you'll start getting some of that feedback early on. If there's a new kind of villain style that you've never played around with that you want to do, create a game and have a villain, with that sort of style.
Yeah, if you've never done any tabletop role playing, especially if you're a writer, I highly recommend you give it a try, even if only.
No, this isn't for a writer. If you're a storyteller, this is a great way to.
But even if you're, see, my thought is like writing can be a very isolated hobby, an isolating hobby. It can be something you just do by yourself, sitting at the computer just to occupy yourself. But world building, creation, and tabletop role playing is so interactive, and you will get so much out of it because now you're crowdsourcing a story.
And some of you are sitting back there going, you know what? I'm in a group of writers and we collaborate and we send the story back and forth and we just keep adding to it. That's something different. And that's good too. The difference with interactive gaming versus that is you're actually collaborating with people who are like the people who might buy your book.
And it's also happening on the fly.
Yes.
Which is different than sitting around and having enough time to create a story.
It will train you to overcome the obstacles that the characters or the scenarios will throw at you as you're writing a long-form story. Or sometimes even a short-form story. If you come up with this great idea and you add in the scene that you hadn't even thought about, and then you realize, well, I just killed off like half of
the book characters.
The book characters in one scene, and it's like I'm now to word 2000 of my short story.
Right.
It'll really get you through those kind of blockages in your writing. So do not overlook or underestimate. Now, the thing I would suggest not to do, don't role play out and turn that directly into a book, because some of the people who are the characters in there might feel a bit offended that you're doing my character in your book, or, but the thing is, it's a great way to test out your world. It's a great way to test out storytelling techniques. And it's a great way to, test out, character archetypes that you want to use, sort of a skeletal version, different details, but, maybe, you've never done a psychopathic killer before, and you really want to see if you can creep the players out with it. If you do a good storytelling, it can work. The thing you have to do is when you get done with your sessions, you have to think back. Now, they really were creeped out by that character, but was it from my presentation? Because when I present creepy, people buy it instantly because I'm just creepy.
Well, you walking in with an actual severed head, it's a bit strong for a tabletop
that
game.
Player lost. He failed. And
it's not
killed.
my fault. It was a bad roll. I was there for that. But I think pulling out a broadsword on him was a bit heavy-handed. All of this was Jeff's very long-winded, boring way of saying this is going to be a 2-part episode. So we do have more to cover on this topic, but we're going to see you in part 2. Do you want to?
Yeah.
So how about we just close it up with the World Builder's task?
Okay. And I might have to slightly modify it if it doesn't make sense here. Let me just do some research on a place in your world that you would like to tell a story in that you have not. Just identify. Just go into all of your world notes. If you're like me, you have at least one page of them.
And a map.
You definitely have a map, which is probably the one page you have. Or maybe you have many pages like I also really do have. But find that spot that you know a little bit about and it's always interested you, but you haven't really had a chance to flesh
develop
it.
Develop it. How about the real world task?
So the real world task is to do some research on the types of games that are out there, tabletop role-play games specifically, or go through your board game collection and see if you can throw something together that you can actually do this with. And figure out what kind of game you would like to do interactive storytelling with your friends.
Yeah, I think that's a good one.
Or strangers that you meet in weird places.
The tease on this one's really simple. Part 2. Part 2 is coming.
Yes. And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. They'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at gardul.com to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike, while the myth rolls high.